Hello and welcome to my Cryengine 3 tutorial where we are going to model a stop sign in 3ds Max, and then we are going to bring it into Photoshop, texture it, use Undo 2 to create a normal map for these little rivets, and we are going to create a specular, diffuse, and normal map for this entire model, bring it into Cryengine 3, and then we are going to also use the material editor to set up our material. And you should have a pretty good idea of how to use the Crytiff exporter. You will hopefully you already have a basic understanding of how to use Photoshop. Because I don't want to take a ton of time on that and how to texture your objects. We're going to also do some basic UV unwrapping and basic modeling. So I'm hoping that you understand the basics of all of these and that you will be able to follow along. And I'm going to do my best to be as thorough as possible. Please feel free to comment, subscribe, and do anything that you want to give me feedback and just say, hey, could you do this better? Could you explain this a little bit more? If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I should be able to answer you in a timely manner. So with that said, let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to think about is we want to look at the shape. What are we going to make? And what are the main important things? Well, this is a flat plane. Well, actually, it technically has some thickness. We don't want this to be just a two-dimensional object, especially in a next-gen game. We can spare the extra polygons. These are going to be normal mapped, as they are generally little rivets, and they are what bolt it to the back of the sign, which we actually aren't going to model. We're just going to texture this in. We don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this asset. We just want to get the workflow down and understand some of the basic tools and concepts to texturing, UV unwrapping, and all of that. And we're not going to make this a super high quality asset. It's just to give you a basic understanding and a foundation to build upon. And then we're going to obviously make a pole, which is a very simple object. So with that said, I hope that you have a second monitor you can keep your reference image on, but it's a stop sign and it's a very simple shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to open 3ds Max, make sure you have 2012, and you have the Cryengine 3 exporter installed. If you don't have that installed, I would recommend going and doing that right now before you can finish this tutorial. And I would install the trial for Photoshop CS6 off the Adobe website. I would recommend going to quixel.se, and I will have links to all of these downloads below, and downloading the Undo 2 trial. And it's what we're going to do to generate our normal maps from our images to add a little bit more realism and detail and depth to our textures, as that is very important for creating realistic textures and having believable game assets that don't make it look like you just figured out how to use paint. So make sure you have all of these. It's going to be Undo 2 is kind of an awkward looking interface at first, but once you get it down, and if you follow my tutorial, you will be able to understand the basic ideas and concepts behind it. Well, hopefully, or at least know how to make a new normal map, which is pretty simple since it has a big button right here. I'm hoping that you have you have a somewhat familiarity with Photoshop CS6 or any version of Photoshop. And if you don't want to go buy Photoshop or even download the trial, feel free to use GIMP. It's a free, I guess you could call it a free version of Photoshop. It's just not as good and won't support Undo 2 to the best of my knowledge. So if that's the case, then I guess you'll have to do without this normal map part of the tutorial. Let's see. And of course you need to have the Cryengine 3 downloaded and installed, and you should have an open level, which is done by clicking File, New, and then when you generate it, make a new file, and then generate some terrain, and you will have a level. And let me just make this setup here so that way it's much more recognizable. So let's get into modeling now that we have all of that covered, and hopefully you have it all set up and you understand the basics. Because I don't want to spend too much time on anything besides the workflow and just getting it done. I don't want to spend more than a half an hour on this asset. It's a fairly simple asset. Let's focus on making an octagon. So the first thing we want to do is drag out a cylinder. We're going to drag it out right here in the middle and press F4. Press F4 to turn on edged faces. And you'll see that we have a lot of height segments we can get rid of, and we need to obviously make this 8-sided. So go to the modifier panel, and let's first make the height a little bit skinnier. Let's bring it down to about, about half an inch there. Even though that's not really how thick a stop sign is, we just want to do it for this tutorial. Now, what we want to do to make sure that when we bring it into Cryengine, we want to make the size correct, because the Cryengine will use the units from within 3ds Max for scale. So go to metric and set it to, let's set it to centimeters. You can use any of these really for Cryengine, but the Cryengine uses the metric system, and that's what we're going to be using. So we're going to use centimeters. I don't really know the exact size of a stop sign, and it's not really worth measuring. But let's make this 0.5 centimeters tall, or yeah, tall, and then we'll make the radius, let's do 40 centimeters. And then we're going to bring the sides down to 8. And as you can see, it's not centered. It's not how a stop sign would look, and it just would make it difficult to model this way. So let's press T to go into our top view, which is an orthographic view. And we're going to press E on our keyboard, or alternately you can select the rotate tool up here. And we will press angle snaps on by pressing A or clicking up here, and it will snap the angle every 5 degrees. We're going to do this until we get pretty close to a flat, or having this line right here be parallel with this part of the grid. But at this point, you can see that angle snaps isn't going to satisfy what we need, so press A to turn that off, or again, alternately click up here. And then we're going to rotate this until we have a nice, perfect line. There's a little, it's not 100% perfect, but it's more than good enough for this tutorial. So press P on your keyboard to go back into your perspective view. And we are going to also lower the height segments. Now, there's only one polygon per side connecting it, which obviously is a lower poly count, which is important for games, and will just be more logical, I guess. So, as you can see, this shape is going, the brackets are not correct. The brackets are at an angle, when really, they shouldn't have to be. This is our bottom, this is our top. We're going to model everything around that, and we want to do something called resetting our X form. I really don't understand the reasoning behind it, but I know what it does, and that basically means, like, let's say we scale this up or down. Every time we do that, and we export it, unless we reset the X form, which is important for animating from what I've heard. I'm not an animator, I have no plans to be. But I've heard that it's very important when you're animating to reset the X form of your object. I do know it is in Cryengine, and if if let's say you wanted to make it like this, and you export it out, it may or may not actually come out like that in Cryengine because you didn't reset your X form. So just make sure you reset your X form after you scale things and after you make adjustments involving shape or size or rotation. And usually you do it before your final export, but I prefer to do it right now just because it's just a more logical workflow. So we're going to right click on this modifier that we can also get alternately by going through our modifier list to reset X form. Or we can click over here and on this little hammer under the utilities tab and click reset X form and reset selected, which is another way to do it, but now we have two. So we're going to right click, collapse all, and now you can see that we have the brackets working perfectly, the X forms have been reset, and it's ready to be rotated, and we're ready to start building the next part. So let's turn on angle snaps by pressing A, and we are going to, on the Z-axis, we are going to rotate this 90 degrees. As you can see, it's completely perpendicular with the grid. And let's raise it up to about where we think a stop sign would be. That looks good. Next thing we're going to do is, you see that it's an editable mesh. Well, we don't have access to the graphite modeling tools, So let's right click, make editable poly, or alternately right click, convert to editable poly. Both work. I prefer up here. It really depends on your preference. Next, we're going to go back to our create panel. Under standard primitives, let's go to cylinder, and let's just click right down here on the grid. Make it about what you think a pole would be for a stop sign. I mean, obviously there's tons of different pole designs for stop signs, but we're just going to make it a round one for the simplicity of this tutorial. And since, I mean, at least on my machine, I have a pretty powerful computer, so I don't mind having a pretty ridiculous poly count for such a simplistic object. So I'm going to make it about 10 sides. Let's turn the radius down to about, let's make it 2.5 centimeters for the radius. And the height will make it 170. Well, no, let's do about 160 for 160 centimeters in height. 150. That looks a lot better. Perfect. If you want to make a better stop sign than me, I'd recommend using a reference image. This I am not. I'm using a very poorly made asset, which is the very first Cryengine asset I actually ever made. And that is what I'm using really for my reference. Even though it's such a simple object, you shouldn't need a reference. I mean, if you've ever seen a stop sign, I'd hope you have a recollection of what they look like. Considering if you ever plan to drive or have driven, you'll be looking at them. So, to make this easier, to manipulate, let's say we didn't want to rotate it from here or here. We want to go over here to the hierarchy panel and effect pivot only and center to object, and now our pivot is in the middle of this object. It's useful when you're making a lot of other things, and hopefully if you're new to modeling and just new to 3ds Max, you know, that'll be a helpful tip for you. So now we have the basic shape of our sign done, and it looks like the proportions are off. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise this up a bit, and then alternately we're going to click this, make this about 190 centimeters. And we're going to call that good. That looks much more natural. Maybe make this 3 centimeters in radius. So now that we have our basic shape done, it's time to unwrap the UVs. So let's just double check, make sure we have everything we want and looking how we want. So let's go into our front view. You can see that these models aren't touching. Let's bring them so they're about touching by pressing F to get in the front view. And then let's press P. And looks like it's all ready to go. So next thing we want to do is we're going to unwrap the UVs. Now this isn't going to be a good unwrap, and I don't know really where you are in your understanding of 3ds Max, Cryengine and all that, or texturing. So I'm just going to make it very, very basic and easy to follow instead of focusing on quality. So we're going to go down here to in the modifier list under the modifier panel actually first, you know what? I am wrong. We need to go and make these two one object. So before you do that, let's go and we're going to go click just the first object. We're going to name this stop sign up here. And we're going to go down with this selected as an editable poly and go down to attach. None of the sub objects selected, and click on that pole right there. Now this is all one object. Movable is one and unwrappable is one object. So next we're going to go into our modifier list with the stop sign selected, and we are going to unwrap the UVs using the unwrap UVW map or modifier. So the first thing we want to do, and basically if you don't understand what a UV map is, basically a UV map is if you ever were to look at a texture. Let's bring up one of my crappy textures that I attempted to make. For example, this frag grenade. Basically, you can see how if you were to look at the original frag, basically, you can see how these shapes correspond with the texture on here. So for example, I have all of these little clips are all using this one part of the texture map. So that way I saved UV space, and I mean this is a terrible texture, but it's a good example because this is basically a 2D representation of your model, And that's what laying out a UV map is, and then we paint over it and texture it. So what we're going to do is we are going to now get down to that part, and then we're going to get into Photoshop and start texturing. So the first thing you want to do is, with this selected, is go to your polygon selection tool and click Open UV Editor. Now we can look at our UVs, and you can see that they are crowded. This is our UV space, which will be what will turn into a texture later on when we export it. So I'm going to leave it in here because I have other monitors, which I'd highly recommend for any 3ds Max workflow. But we're going to use one monitor for now. So with this selected, and with this, select all of these sides by holding down Control and clicking on the sides. Select the entire edge of your model and the front face where the stop sign will be. And you can see over here it looks pretty chaotic. So what we're going to do to remedy that is go down to this quick planar map. And once we do that, it will make it a planar, or it'll make basically this entire polygon, this set of polygons, a plane. Now as you can see, it's not a very good map. I mean, if you look at it, it doesn't represent all of these little sides right here. For this tutorial, that's fine. There's a lot of other ways though to go about this. I mean, for example, you could relax them, and which is what I probably wouldn't ever make them like this, but you can. Actually, no, this is what we're gonna do. So with this selected, all of these polygons selected over here, we're going to go up to Tools, Relax, and basically what it'll do is it'll relax the edges, but still keep the shape. So let's go to Keep Boundary Points Fixed, which basically means this entire shape will be retained even when we relax it, because if you don't, that happens. Not always, but that is one thing. And then we're going to go to Relax by Face Angles. Click Start Relax, click Apply, and exit out. And now you can see those small faces are now being represented on our UV map. So it won't cause a bunch of UV stretching. Would basically mean, for example, I guess the best way to explain it is, let's say I have a texture here. Well, this part, these little polygons would be covered by that, and they would just get stretched, and it would look like a bunch of lines, and it would look terrible. So that's something to try to avoid. So now with this selected, let's move it over here. Get that out of the way for now. Let's go to the back, select this, do the same thing. Click Quick Planar Map, drag it up there. This one we didn't select any additional polygons, so you can leave that fine, just how it is. And then next we're going to make a planar map out of, well, yeah, we'll do it this time. Normally I would delete this polygon because you'd never see it, but I don't want to have to go back and redo everything. So let's just leave it for the sake of this tutorial. Make that a planar map as it already is. That sounds good. Drag it out. Same here. So now that all that's left is this. So there's quite a few modifiers or tools that it can be used to unwrap different shapes. For example, the projection spherical map, box map, cylindrical map, or the planar map. They have align options down here. But this time we're just going to use, and it won't look very good because of the stretching that we're going to see. Control click and drag all the way around the object. And we're going to click projection cylindrical map, which is of course under this modifier panel, in the modifier panel. And then now this is being represented as so. Uncheck the cylindrical map, and now you can move around in here. And this is basically our UVs. We're going to pack them into this little square, and the size of each one will determine the amount of detail that will be put into this texture. So you'll want the stop sign to have the most detail, and then this to have the second most. I mean, to have the top and bottom of the pole have a lot of detail would be pretty much a waste of space. So we're not going to really bother about those. So let's get rid of those first. Let's click this first one, press R on the keyboard, or click the Scale Selected Subobjects. We're going to scale this down till it's almost no space at all. Press W or click up here for the move, and we'll drag it right there. Same with this one, R, scale down, W, move. I mean, you could make them way smaller. This texture size is probably going to be either 512 or 1024 by 1024. Honestly, it really doesn't matter to me. Next thing we want to do is we're going to click Select UV Element toggle. That way I can select a bunch or a set of elements in this thing. So normally, if I had just this selected, it would only select one polygon, but if I select the element, it'll select all of them. So let's start packing in some UVs. So press R, scale down this front. This is the front of the stop sign. Always make sure you keep tabs on what is what. We'll put that in there, probably scale it to there. Then we'll take this, which is the back of the stop sign. It won't need as much detail since it's not as important of a piece. Another thing to know is that the tighter you pack your UVs, the better, because that means the more detail your texture is going to get overall. And it's kind of like an art. It's also really relaxing, and it's pretty fun, actually. But just remember, once you have your UVs laid out and you start texturing, and you decide, oh man, I gotta change something, you're gonna have to pretty much, unless you do it right, you're gonna have to retexture the entire object, depending on the complexity of the change you want to make. So keep that in mind before you come up with a final thing. And then this is gonna look really stretched. I mean, it's not set up right at all, but we'll call it good, just for the sake of this tutorial. You know what? Let's not call it good. Let's select by UV element. We're gonna select all of these vertices. Press W. And let's drag them up. Just to kind of represent the look of that pole a little bit better. And you're probably thinking, holy crap, that takes up a lot of space. Well, it does. But that's why we are going to press E, have angle snaps on, and rotate it 90 degrees. And then we can scale it down. Get it in there. And we have our terrible, very quick UV unwrap. And we are going to simply, well, let's render out a UV template. A UV template is basically all of these lines in a texture file, or just an image file. So we're going to do that. Render UV template under Tools. And we're going to want to make this, let's leave it at 1024. So we'll leave it how it is. If it's not 1024 on yours, make it 1024 by 1024. Click Render UV Template. Mine opened up on my second monitor, or my third monitor. And we are going to click this little Save Image, and we are going to save it out as a PNG file. There's a reason for that, and basically the reason is this will be on its own separate layer. All these lines will be, and the black won't be, which makes it so we can toggle it on and off and display it on top of anything that we're painting. It just makes it overall a much easier process to texture. So we're going to save this as stop underscore sign underscore UV underscore template. Personally, I'm a very disorganized person. Well, I guess that's a lie, but it's best to keep it organized and to keep it well labeled, because if you ever want to do this as a career, it's really important that you have good naming conventions and you make it easy, so that way anybody who wants to start working on your asset, let's say you're on you're a modeler and your job is to unwrap UVs and model objects, well, you want somebody else to pick up your work and instantly know what they're working with. So with that said, let's get into the next part. So go into your modifier panel, click the Unwrap UVW modifier, and collapse all. Now that that's done, all of your coordinates will be are going to be stuck in there and will still stay once you export it to Cryengine. So the next thing we want to do is we are going to bring this into Photoshop. and make sure you have undo set up and all of that. So actually undo isn't really super crucial, but it would be nice to be able to do. So go and locate your UV template, stop sign UV template, and we are going to, like I said, I'm hoping that you're pretty used to using Photoshop. So go down and create new layer, drag it underneath layer 01. We're going to make a big brush, and basically, let's just use the fill brush. The paint bucket brush. Make a pure black background for this layer so you can toggle this on and off. Okay, next, press Control O to open up your opening file dialog. Locate in the project files, stop sign. And as you can see, this is a PNG, so we don't have to delete anything or really do anything because it's on its own layer. Drag and drop it over here. And we're going to scale this to right size. If you want, you can toggle the or turn the opacity down so you can get a better look at everything at your UVs. Try and center it. If it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter since this is just a tutorial. And as you can see, that is looking good. Just make sure it's not going over into the other one. So as you can see, it started to go over into the next UV, which is a simple fix because there's still a space in between them. So turn that all the way up. Use the marquee selection tool, rectangular selection tool, with this layer selected. Select that much and click delete. Make it a little bit closer of a shave. So we're going to just go cut off a little bit more and call that good. Because again, it's not part of our UVs, so it won't matter. We're going to want to turn down the brightness on that as well, which it doesn't feel like doing. So we'll leave it like that for now. Oftentimes in Cryengine, you want to keep things desaturated as well as very dark, because when they are too bright, you can't. It just looks overly bright. Cryengine prefers it that way for a myriad of reasons, but we won't really need to get into that. So next, we're going to add a new layer. Put it up or above the stop sign layer, doesn't matter. Control O for open, and bring out that metal texture. Let's select about this much of it. That's a nice good metal texture. And we are going to, with that selected, use our move tool, drag this over here. As you can see, it's rather large, so we are going to resize this. And by using these little handlers, press enter, drag it back over here. Now it's going to look like a pretty stretched and not that great texture, but like I said, this is a tutorial giving you a workflow understandings and some basic understandings of some basic principles, not really to make a great and perfect texture. Let's turn down the contrast with this, as well as the brightness. Under image, adjustments, brightness and contrast. And then we're good with that. And then for the back of this stop sign and the top up here, we're really not going to take any time at all on that. Let's just drag out a selection that will cover both of these. And go to the brush tool. And let's fill this in with a gray. And that's pretty terrible, but it will work for this tutorial. It'll work just fine. So just to add a little bit more detail, if you have any extra brushes that you feel like using, you can do that as well. Control-Alt-Z will bring you backwards if you make a mistake, and that's very important. At least I use that tool all the time. So I'm going to add a little bit of detail to this texture, but you don't have to. Oh, let's call that good. Doesn't have to look anything good at all. And next you're going to want to go back to layer 0, which is our UVs, and let's delete that. And then we're going to go up to the layer panel and click flatten image. We now have our texture set up. And there's one last thing I actually forgot to do, so let's create one more new layer. And let's hold down this rectangular marquee tool, make it an elliptical, click and drag, and hold shift to make it a perfect circle. Let's make it about this big. And you want to click and drag a almost white and then paint this totally white. Now it's looking good. And then you want to turn off that marquee by using the marquee and clicking anywhere on the screen. That selection. Scale this down again. You can hold Control Alt and Shift to scroll in on your keyboard or just to zoom in. And then we're going to, now with that done, we'll just place it there. And we're going to go right click, duplicate layer. Okay. Drag a copy of the layer right here. Place it how you like it. Select both layers and duplicate them. Scroll up. Drag up your duplicated copy. We'll call that good. And then we're going to collapse all of these layers. So you can either select them and then generally, yeah, you just merge them down, or you can just Control E until they're all one layer. So now you can move them all as one. Now we're going to go into layer styles and click blending options on right clicking this layer. And we're going to do generally I'd never do this, but in this situation, I think it actually isn't that bad of an idea. We're going to do an inner glow. And we're going to turn up the size, make the color black, make it gray. Let's make it a medium gray. Turn up the choke. Actually, sorry. You know what? Let's do an inner shadow. I don't know what I was thinking. Turn down the distance. And then make the size about 7 pixels. Let's do 6 pixels. And then press enter. And it will now close that dialog. It does look a little bit awkward, but that doesn't matter because it's just a tutorial and we want to use Endo 2 to make that have detail and make there be some depth detail on here as well. So the next thing we'd like to do is let's press Control E and make that all one layer. Let's save this as stop sign. Let's go to our Cryengine download site. And we're going to go under our game folder into levels. No, unless you have a level set up. Well, let's say you have a level set up. So if you had a level, we would put it under test level. But, well, yeah, let's do test level. No, that's a bad idea. We'll put it under textures. Click new. We'll call this stop sign textures. Once you're inside stop sign textures, save this out with the Crytiff plugin for Photoshop. It comes with the free SDK. There's plenty of tutorials online how to set it up, as well as on the Crydev website, crydev.net. So go to Crytiff plugin, save it, and then it'll ask you how you want to save it. Do you want to optimize the file? Make it lower resolution? No, I don't. I want it 1024. Make it diffuse high quality, and then click OK. And it just saved it out. Next thing we'd like to do is make a specular map. A specular map basically means, let's say, because we all know white on a stop sign is more reflective than red on a stop sign. Well, a specular map will make that happen inside the game engine and choose what is shiny and what's not. So what we're going to want to do is make this black and white because specular maps are black and white. White being the hotter and the more bright part of the object, and the black being the darker. So we will go down and check black and white. Let's press the arrow keys to go through our presets till we find a good one, or good base. We'll use that as a good base because this is still a reflective material. We're going to go back, use contrast, and let's brighten this up a little bit. Add some more contrast. Set it up like that. Call it good. And then using our marquee tool, let's turn down the brightness on here. And we've got a good specular map for this circumstance. Save as, Crytiff, and then we're going to change this to sign. We'll do stop sign diff spec for specular. We're going to want to unoptimize the file, go to specular high quality, and click OK. Next, we're going to use undo 2 to make our normal map. We aren't going to really want a normal map on the back of the sign, not in this case at least. So what we're going to do is click and delete. We're going to want to make this a layer from background. Click delete, make a new layer underneath it, paint it black, and fill that in. All we're going to really want is these little guys and this guy. So let's select using this little magic wand tool, or sorry, quick selection tool. Select these little circles. There's much easier ways to do this. If we had left these as separate layers, that was another way we could have done it. Next, you want to scroll up. Press Alt to use the negative brush. We're going to Control C and then V. So we make a new layer of just these guys. And then we're going to want to go back to layer 0. Delete this stop sign. I mean, again, there's much easier ways to do this. And then now we have, if we collapse these two layers, we have this, and then so it turns out I actually made an error when I was selecting these. I had the wrong layer selected, so it caused me to select what's behind the stop sign. When you're doing this, make sure you have the right layer selected. Press Control V, and now we have the correct layer selected. Okay, with that done, we're going to want to isolate and delete the. We're going to isolate the pole. So we're going to delete. And now we're ready to make a normal map. So with undo 2 open, collapse all these layers, and click Convert Image to a normal map. And it will work its magic. And there you go. These bumps will now stick out like rivets, and light will act accordingly. This is a little bit too extreme. So we're going to click Convert, and then actually, I apologize. We're going to click Presets. Scroll down to Standard Metal and Active Dock. And now it's a little bit more subdued, but we still have rivets. There's lots of ways to do it, and undo has a lot of really cool features. Like I can make large dents much bigger, but we don't want to mess with that really so much right now. So we're going to leave it how it is when you first generate it. Flatten that image. Save it out as a stop. Actually, quick, let's rename this. I renamed it wrong, so right-click, rename. Stop sign underscore diff for diffuse. So now we're going to name this stop sign underscore normal with Crytiff selected. Click Save. Click Normal Map High Quality. Auto Optimize off. And this might take a while. Generally, saving out normal maps can take quite a bit of time. So click OK. And now we have that part done. We have all 3 of our textures ready to be put into Cryengine. As you can see, go make sure you have them all in a place that you can remember. And you got all 3. And it makes a DDS file as well, but we're going to use the TIFF file. Even though they generally are larger files, they are lossless in quality. And definitely, I haven't really checked to see what the image quality difference is, but I just prefer to use them because you can also reopen them in Photoshop very easily. There's ways to open DDSs with the NVIDIA texture tools, but that is not what this tutorial is about. So let's make sure we know where we save those and close Photoshop. Next in 3ds Max, we're going to get on to the next part where we are going to export this to the Cryengine. So we're going to go to our Utilities tab. We're going to make sure we have our Xform reset. Remember, you can get to it through here or through the Utilities tab, Reset Xform, Reset Selected. After you have that, collapse it, and that'll just make sure it exports right. One last thing is that where this pivot point is very important, because if you see it up here, this is where that object is going to be adjusted from within Cryengine, as well as 3ds Max. So we want to take our pivot point by clicking Affect Pivot Point, and you see how it has these little arrows? That's basically telling you the axes that it will be associated with or how it will work. So we're going to take this all the way down to the bottom. You can click L on your keyboard if you want to get super exact. You can put right there. And next we're going to go and set it up for export. It's a very simple process. So now we're going to go into our Utilities tab, go to the Cryengine 3 Exporter, and before we go ahead and export this, I want to point out a few things. Generally, game engines don't accept n-gons like this, which is a polygon with more than 4 sides. Normally they accept tris, which are shapes with 3 sides, or a triangle. I've found that oftentimes separating yourself will cause Cryengine to give you some exporting errors. So I actually just leave all shapes like this as n-gons, and it will triangulate it itself, and generally it has less errors that way. You're going to run into that a lot, and there's a lot of ways around it, and once I found a much easier way to describe it and really find a solution to it, because it plagues quite a few people. You'll see it one day if you make a complex model. You're going to be like, I don't know what a degenerate face is. I don't know how to fix it. But basically it'll give you an error saying, degenerate faces, and it'll try to get you to select them and fix them, and it's just a pain in the butt. So next thing we're going to do is scroll down, and we're going to click Material. We're going to do Create Material. We're going to want to place this in our level. In my case, mine is actually called Indoor Test. So I'm going to navigate to my level that I have open. Once you generate a level, it automatically makes, under Game, Levels, it makes a level name for that. So mine is Indoor Test. And I'm going to make a Textures folder. And we're going to make this called Stop Sign. Go inside of that. Save this material out as Stop Sign Material Tutorial. Click Save. And then now, under Levels, Indoor, Texture, Stop Sign Material, we have a material for our stop sign all set up. So the next thing we want to do is now export it, and it will be all ready to get set up. So the first thing we want to do is click pick your sign, stop sign. Make sure it's in the right place that we want to export it. Actually, before we export it, we have to save this in the same directory, this max file, into the same directory that we want to export it to. So click Save As. Find your level, go to Objects, And we're going to call this stop sign. And then click Save. So now we're all ready to export. Just to triple check. So it's going to go indoor test, object, stop sign, save. Okay, now it's all ready to go. So click Export Nodes. Bang. Done. Open Cryengine. Go over here to Geometric Entities. Click Reload. Levels. Indoor test. Objects. Stop sign. Make sure you have the follow terrain and snap to objects on. Drag and drop. And there is our shape. And as you can see, it came in at an awkward angle, which is kind of odd, but it'll work for now. Make sure you have angle snap on and use the y-axis to put that at a 90-degree angle. Click 1 to bring it down. And our stop sign material is ready to be set up. So with this object selected, we forgot a crucial step. See, this is why it's important to understand these things and to make mistakes, because if you make mistakes, then you can go back and realize what you did wrong. For example, in this one, this doesn't actually have a collision object. So if I were to use this, I could go and run right through it. Well, that's not how we want it to work at all. So we are going to go back to stopsign.max, and we have to apply the Crytek shader. So we're going to press M on our keyboard, open up the material editor. Using a slate material editor is really in my opinion, the best way. If you have a newer version of Max, it will have this. Just use 2012, that's what I'm using. It makes a tutorial much simpler. Click standard, drag that into your slate material editor, apply the material, double click this, and go to Crytek shader, physicalize. Exit this, re-export the nodes, and then now sometimes you have to replace this in the scene. So delete that, stop sign, but now it actually makes it so we can run into it. So now that we have that all set up, with this selected, it also makes it easier to select because it has now a collision object, which if you don't have that, it makes it very difficult to select your object. So with this selected, go over to our stop sign material, right click, assign a selected object. Nothing's changed. But now we're going to set up the maps and everything for it. So, oh, sorry, if you couldn't see it over here, I apologize. I forget that's not recording two monitors. So when I exported it, it exported it to stop sign material tutorial. And we want to go now with this selected, right click, assign selected objects. So with this looked at, my time of day turned to nighttime for whatever reason, so I'm going to turn that back. The material editor, we're going to want to scroll down to diffuse, and let's go and locate our texture files that we had set up. So in this case, we put it under the game folder, textures, and then we have stop sign textures. We're going to make it the diffuse. It sometimes can take a little bit of time before it gets set up right, or before it accepts it, so just give it some time. Then we're going to want to drag in the specular, under the specular map obviously, and the bump map, which is the normal map. So now we have our materials set up. Now it's just time to tweak them a little bit, get them looking good. It's a terrible texture. That's the whole point of this tutorial. You understand though now a lot of other things you didn't, hopefully. So we want to set the surface type to metal, because this will allow it to now, have a metal decal once we hit it, or shoot at it, or anything. It just, you can set up anything else. So like, let's say your object is made out of glass, use the glass one. or the shader, you'd use the glass shader. Illum is used for about 90% of the objects. Opacity, there's a lot of really cool things that you can use in the material editor. One reason a lot of people make things, they can even make them black and white, is so that way you can change the color and make a lot of assets look different. You can see here, actually once we make it completely red, you can see how our normal map actually makes it look like this uses light, or like there's depth to those little divots when there's really not at all. And it's just a nice way to add fake detail without having a massive poly count. As you can see, they're actually inwards, but that's not really, again, that's not the point of the tutorial. So what we're going to do is turn up the glossiness and the specular, make that a gray color. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you were to mess with this in a certain light, you would definitely be able to see why it makes a big difference. Or if you were to put it into, say, a viz area, like this one over here. Let me show you what I mean. I oftentimes like to set up my materials indoors, which is something else that we'll talk about later. So we're just going to drag it into this scene I'm working on right now. You can see how, that specular and the glossiness is affected by the lighting. The lighting in this scene is extreme. So, I'd recommend just setting up some basic lights, which is something we'll cover in another tutorial. Hopefully you understand how to do at least something basic like that. So, after you set up that how you like it, you want to get it looking like metal, because if it doesn't look like metal, then it wouldn't make any sense. So let's go out into my computer's feeling like being slow. I guess after 52 seconds of recording, or 52 minutes, I guess it's logical. So now that we have that set up, we're going to, I just want to let you know about some of the other things. There's Fresnel bias, power scale. All of these things, including the shader generation parameters, are very important. Like, let's say we want to make this metal much more realistic. Well, if we were to add an environment map which reflects a fake environment, we could have a lot more detail added to our object to make it look like it's actually reflecting things. Especially when you have the see now how it looks like it's actually reflecting things around in the scene. You can see some sky. This is actually from another scene of mine. So I mean, that's just when you're working on textures and stuff, just play around. Look at other people's textures, and I mean, someday I might actually just upload a map for people to look at all of the things I've done, so that way they can kind of learn from them, or maybe give me suggestions on how to improve it. Let's see. I think we've got just about everything we need covered. You should have learned quite a bit, I'm hoping. If not, leave me a comment. Be sure to message, subscribe, give feedback, like the Facebook page, tell me how stupid I am, give suggestions for other tutorials, tell us what you want to learn. Sounds good. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good day.